As the sun rose on a new century, the world held its breath. Kingdoms stretched from horizon to horizon. Across 3 continents, mighty crowns competed for dominance, and the world would never belong to just one. Power is never vacant for long. The greatest thrones of the age waited for hands strong enough to hold them. Kings and conquerors, slaves and scientists, martyrs and merchants. The 17th century would spare nothing and no one. In 1600, 6 great empires held the fate of mankind, each convinced that God had chosen them alone. The 17th century begins. 100 years of war, discovery, faith, and ruin, starting now. The 17th century, age of kings and revolutions. The world would be remade before it was done. Part 1. The world awakens. The year is 1600 and the age of empires is at its violent peak. Chapter 1. The Spanish Colossus. No empire on earth was richer, mightier, or more feared than Spain. Spanish galleons crossed the Atlantic carrying fortunes that dwarfed the treasuries of entire rival kingdoms. Into Seville's harbor poured the wealth of the Americas, silver and gold on a scale the world had never seen. Spain's empire stretched across 5 continents. From Peru to the Philippines, the sun never set on its flag. Philip III wore the greatest crown in Christendom, but behind that throne, others held the real power. The Duke of Lerma ruled Spain from the shadows. The king signed. The minister decided. The Spanish tercio was the most feared fighting force on earth, a perfect machine of pike and musket. The Low Countries were a wound that never healed, Protestant North and Catholic South bleeding Spain dry. After decades of war, exhausted armies put down their weapons. The 12 years truce of 1609 brought fragile silence. 300,000 Moriscos, Spanish Muslims, were driven into exile. Spain called it purification. History calls it folly. Treasure poured in, and still Spain fell behind. Wealth without industry is only borrowed time. Chapter 2. The Ottoman Crescent. From the Balkans to Persia, one empire commanded the crossroads of the world. Constantinople, capital of the Ottoman sultans, rose at the meeting point of Europe and Asia, radiant at dawn. The Ottoman Empire stretched from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algiers to the Persian frontier, a world within a world. Sultan Ahmed I was young, pious, and ambitious. His legacy would be carved in stone across Constantinople's skyline. The Janissaries marched as one terrifying body. Beside them rode the Sipahi cavalry, the empire's iron fist. On the Hungarian frontier, Ottoman and Habsburg forces skirmished endlessly, a border that ate soldiers by the thousands. To the east, the Safavids challenged Ottoman power. Sunni and Shia, Islam divided against itself. Behind the magnificent facade, the Ottoman system was rotting quietly. Corruption crept through the palace like slow poison. Chapter 3. Safavid Splendor. In Persia, the greatest ruler of the age was building something extraordinary. Shah Abbas the Great was brilliant, ruthless, and visionary, the man who made Persia the envy of the world. Isfahan was being reborn. Shah Abbas transformed a city into a monument, stone by stone, tile by tile, Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, the image of the world. No public space on earth could match its scale or beauty. Persian carpet weavers worked threads of silk and wool into masterpieces that would outlast dynasties and conquerors alike. Persian miniaturists painted worlds within worlds, armies and lovers and gardens rendered in brush strokes finer than a breath. Shah Abbas rebuilt his army from the ground up, professional, loyal, armed with artillery, answering only to the Shah. From Isfahan, silk caravans departed west. Persia's luxury goods reached Venice, London, and Istanbul, and made fortunes along the way. Persian forces drove the Ottomans back and reclaimed lost territory. Under Abbas, the Safavid star burned brightest. Chapter 4. Mughal Magnificence. In the Indian subcontinent, an empire of breathtaking wealth and cultural achievement flourished. The Mughal Empire commanded the richest subcontinent on Earth. Hundreds of millions of people, vast armies, and unimaginable treasure. Akbar the Great had ruled through tolerance. Hindu and Muslim, warrior and artist, all welcome at his court. In 1605, the great Akbar died. The throne passed to Jahangir, and the empire began to change its character. Jahangir preferred wine and painting to warfare. He was a connoisseur emperor, brilliant in peace, careless with power. Behind the throne stood Nur Jahan, Jahangir's empress, the most powerful woman in Asia, and arguably the true ruler of the Mughals. Mughal painters fused Persian and Indian traditions into something entirely new, vivid, precise, and hauntingly beautiful. In 1608, an English trading ship arrived at Mughal shores. It was a beginning, though no one knew yet what it would become. Chapter 5. Ming Twilight. The greatest dynasty in Chinese history was falling apart from within. The Forbidden City stood at the center of the world's most populous empire, a palace built to house heaven on earth. The Wanli Emperor had not appeared in public for decades. His throne sat empty while a billion people waited. Year after year, the emperor refused his duties. The empire governed itself, badly and with growing rage. In 1620, the Wanli Emperor finally died, leaving behind a dynasty hollowed out by neglect and poisoned by indifference. His successor lasted 1 month. The Taichung Emperor died before anyone learned his name, and the crisis deepened. The eunuch Wei Zhongxian ruled the Ming court through terror, purging rivals, collecting enemies, and destroying what remained of order. Far to the north, on the Manchurian frontier, a chieftain named Nurhaci was quietly uniting the scattered Jurchen tribes. In 1616, Nurhaci declared the later Jin dynasty, a direct challenge to the Ming, spoken from the edge of their own border. China's Great Wall had held for centuries, but the empire behind it was fracturing, and the pressure from the north was building. Chapter 6. Tokugawa Peace. After a century of civil war, Japan was finally, violently, unified. For over 100 years, Japan had torn itself apart. Now the killing was ending, and one man had won everything. Tokugawa Ieyasu had waited longer than any man should have to wait. In 1600, that patience finally paid off. At Sekigahara, the largest battle in Japanese history decided everything. Ieyasu won. His enemies were finished. The emperor remained on his sacred throne, but real power now belonged to the shogun, as it would for 2.5 centuries. Edo, today's Tokyo, grew from a small castle town into one of the largest cities on earth. Tokugawa had chosen well. Every year, feudal lords were required to travel to Edo and live there in attendance to the shogun, keeping potential rebels bankrupt and controlled. Japanese Christians prayed in secret, behind locked doors, in darkened rooms. The shogunate watched. The persecutions were coming. One by one, foreign ships were turned away from Japanese ports. Japan was closing its doors to the world. Chapter 7. Faith and Fury. Across Europe, the wars of religion were far from over. The Catholic Church had not surrendered to the Reformation. It had reformed itself and returned, harder, more disciplined, more determined. Jesuit missionaries sailed to China, Japan, and the Americas, carrying the cross into every corner of the known world. In Northern Europe, Protestantism was no longer a rebellion. It was an established faith, defended by princes and armies. The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of Catholic and Protestant territories, each convinced the other was an enemy of God. The Catholic princes of the empire formed a league, an alliance to defend the old faith against further loss. Protestant princes responded by forming a union of their own. Europe was dividing into armed religious camps. In town squares across Europe, women stood accused of witchcraft. Fear and superstition sent tens of thousands to their deaths. The witch craze burned across Germany, France, and Scotland. In the name of God, Europe murdered its own people. Jewish communities across Europe lived confined within ghetto walls, taxed, restricted, and persecuted, yet enduring. Chapter 8. Crowns in Conflict. The royal houses of Europe were locked in a deadly competition for survival and dominance. Elizabeth I was dying, the last of the Tudors, the greatest queen England had ever known. There would be no heir. James VI of Scotland rode south to claim the English crown. One man would now rule two ancient kingdoms. In Westminster, James was crowned King of England. The Stuart dynasty had begun. It would not end quietly. James believed kings answered only to God. England's parliament believed otherwise. The argument would outlast them both. In the cellars of Parliament, Guy Fawkes was discovered beside enough gunpowder to level the building, and everyone inside it. The plotters were executed with brutal efficiency. Catholic England became more dangerous than ever just to be. Henry IV of France had ended his own religious wars by converting and by granting rights to Protestant citizens. In 1610, a fanatic's knife ended Henry's life in a Paris street. With him died France's best chance for lasting peace. The young King Louis XIII was 9 years old. His mother Marie de Medici would rule in his name and in her own interest. A young bishop named Richelieu was watching French politics carefully. His moment would come. He was a patient man. Chapter 9. Science and Reason. In the laboratories and observatories of Europe, the universe was being reimagined. Galileo Galilei took a Dutch invention, the telescope, and pointed it at the heavens. What he saw changed everything. 4 moons orbited Jupiter. Galileo had proved it. The universe did not revolve around the Earth. When Galileo published his findings, the church paid attention. The collision between faith and reason had begun in earnest. Johannes Kepler proved that planets travel in ellipses, not perfect circles. The mathematics of the cosmos was finally being read. Francis Bacon argued that knowledge must be built from observation and experiment, not from ancient texts and inherited assumptions. William Harvey traced the path of blood through the human body and discovered that the heart is a pump. Medicine would never be the same. Across Europe, scholars began to share discoveries, challenge old ideas, and build something entirely new, a community of science. The printing press carried new ideas across borders faster than any church or king could suppress them. Chapter 10. Commerce and Colonies. A new economic order was being born, built on trade, slavery, and ambition. In 1602, Dutch merchants pooled their capital and created the world's first joint stock company, the VOC. Capitalism had a new engine. Dutch fleets sailed east toward the Spice Islands, determined to break the Portuguese monopoly and seize the trade of Asia. England's East India Company followed close behind, smaller, hungrier, and equally ruthless in its commercial ambitions. Amsterdam became the wealthiest city in Europe, its harbor packed with ships, its warehouses full of goods from every corner of the earth. The Bank of Amsterdam opened in 1609, offering stable currency and credit. Modern finance was quietly being invented. At Jamestown in Virginia, English settlers clung to life, outnumbered, starving, and bewildered by the land they had come to claim. In the terrible winter of 1609, the Jamestown colony nearly perished entirely. Of 500 colonists, fewer than 60 survived. Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec in 1608, planting the French flag on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. In 1620, the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. The Pilgrims had come not for gold, but for the freedom to pray as they chose. Across the Atlantic, in West African ports, men and women were being loaded into the holds of ships. The slave trade was growing. The Middle Passage was a nightmare of weeks crossing an ocean in chains, with disease, violence, and death at every hour. In Brazil and the Caribbean, enslaved Africans worked the sugar plantations that made European merchants spectacularly wealthy. Chapter 11. Art and Culture. Even in an age of war and plague, human creativity blazed at its most extraordinary. Caravaggio painted saints and sinners with shattering drama, light tearing through darkness like a blade. Baroque art was born. Rubens filled canvas after enormous canvas with color and life, the most prolific artistic genius of the age. In London, William Shakespeare was writing plays that would last forever, tragedies and comedies that mapped the whole human soul. At the Globe Theatre, groundlings and nobles laughed and wept together. Shakespeare's stage held a mirror to the world. In Spain, Miguel de Cervantes was inventing the modern novel. The story of a mad knight tilting at windmills still speaks to us today. Claudio Monteverdi composed the first great operas, fusing drama and music into an art form that would conquer the world. Baroque churches rose across Catholic Europe, stone and gilded wood erupting into theatrical glory designed to overwhelm the senses. Chapter 12. The Gathering Storm. In the heart of Europe, a conflict was building that would consume an entire continent. The Holy Roman Empire was not one state. It was 300 territories, each with its own laws, its own faith, and its own grievances. Emperor Rudolph II collected curiosities and ignored crises. The empire drifted while its ruler studied alchemy. His successor, Matthias, inherited the empire's problems without the ability or the will to solve them. Ferdinand of Styria was a different kind of Catholic, uncompromising, zealous, and completely committed to reversing the Reformation by force. In Prague, Protestant Bohemian nobles watched Ferdinand's rise with cold fury. They had rights. He intended to take them away. The Letter of Majesty had guaranteed Bohemian Protestant freedoms. Now Ferdinand's officials were tearing those guarantees apart. When Ferdinand was elected King of Bohemia, the Protestant nobility refused to accept it. The crisis had finally arrived. Across Bohemia, Protestant rage reached its breaking point. Centuries of religious tension were about to become something catastrophic. On the 23rd of May, 1618, Protestant nobles climbed the steps of Prague Castle for a confrontation that would change history. In the council chamber, Protestant nobles faced Catholic royal officials. Words failed. What came next would start a war lasting 30 years. There was a window. It was high. And the Protestant nobles had made a decision. May 23rd, 1618. Remember this date. Today, the 30 Years' War begins. 3 Catholic officials were seized and thrown from the castle window, an act so brazen it shocked every court in Europe. They fell 70 feet and survived, landing in a dung heap below. Catholics called it a miracle. Protestants called it a good throw. Riders carried the news from Prague in every direction. In London, Madrid, Vienna, and Paris, the word was the same: war. Chapter 13. The World in 1625. 25 years had passed. The world had changed, and the worst was yet to come. Europe was consuming itself. The 30 Years' War was spreading devastation across Germany with a ferocity not seen in living memory. Spain remained the mightiest power in Christendom, but its treasury was strained, its armies stretched, and its decline had begun. European colonists were planting flags on every coastline, in America, in Africa, in Asia, and the indigenous world was paying the price.